Right, welcome back to the MMA Creators Podcast, episode number 78, I do believe. Now, last night was capped off with a main event in the UFC that many would considered to be a farce, a sham, and a complete waste of time. Now, I hate to start on a negative note, but I think that's the only way to describe the result of Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic, because it went exactly how we all expected it to go, in my opinion. I hate to start on a somber time, but what was your initial thoughts on that one?
Yeah, come on. There's so many good things we can talk about, and there's so many good positive notes we can start with. Why would you bring it down so many levels?
Well, I wanted to start with the main event, and I wasn't surprised, in the words of my brain's gone. In the words of Nate Diaz, I was not surprised remotely. Stipe looked old. I made the joke on Twitter that Stipe looked like Mike Tyson in there, which we'll also get stuck into. I think that's actually a pretty fair comparison, because at 42 years of age, it was absolutely showing why he didn't belong in there. There's no pop on his punches. And at heavyweight, you think, okay, the power's the last thing to go. He can hang in there maybe a little bit longer, but no, there was absolutely nothing. He looked like a senior citizen chasing Jon Jones down in there. No speed, no power, no nothing. And Jon Jones did what Jon Jones does. I think the only silver lining to that fight, outside of a potential resolution with Tom Aspinall, which we will get stuck into, was that we got to see a little bit more of Jones, a heavyweight, for a more elongated period of time. We saw his speed, which actually surprised me. I know people calling him slow, and I think in comparison to someone like Aspinall, I would actually agree. But overall, he surprised me. I think he looked faster than I thought he would on the feet. The speed of those kicks, particularly in that first round, were like lightning. Really caught me off guard. So I was pleasantly surprised and happy to see more of Jones, at least on the feet. That's what I got out of that.
People say that, right? Power's the last thing to go. It's kind of a lie. It's kind of a lie. The strength of people that age, sure, they're arguably stronger than they ever have been. Power, same thing, right? But in MMA, in combat sports, in boxing, in any striking art, it's one thing having the power, you need the delivery system. And when you get to that age, you almost lose all ability to create a delivery system to that level. So they say the power is the last thing to go, which is true to a certain extent, but it's almost useless to a certain degree. Now,
I get what you're saying.
Heavyweight MMA, small gloves, I understand. But we're watching the boxing even yesterday, and again, we'll circle back to that in a bit. But I said to the person I was watching it with, they said, "Oh, still got that power." It's like, not
No.
Really, to be honest. At heavyweight MMA, it does only take one punch. But how often do you actually see that? How often do you actually see
That's
it?
true. It's actually
Where
a good
that
point.
one punch changes everything for the person that doesn't really have any attributes. It doesn't happen very often, if ever, off the top of my head. Now, of course, there's examples. I'm not saying there's not. I'm just saying it's not very frequent. And then coming back to what you said about the Jon Jones and Stipe, the reason I said why such a negative tone, because, yeah, we can sit here and say that's what we sort of expected from Stipe. Of course, like I did, like the promoter did, like many people did, you're always going to create a narrative where there's a chance he could win. And there was a chance. There's an alternative universe where that uppercut lands with more thud and changes the dynamic of the fight. Sure. But outside of that, I would say I was surprised. I expected Jones to be skilled. I expected Jones to be better. I expected Jones to be able to dictate a lot of the fight. I didn't expect that version of Jon Jones. I did not expect one of the best versions of Jon Jones we've ever seen. Because if you want to talk about performances, pound for pound performances, in his own career, he hasn't had a performance that good since the Alex fights. So I am surprised, to be perfectly honest. Yes, after a multiple year layoff, after a bad injury and a surgery, and after 16 years on top of the game at heavyweight, I know the opposition is
Yeah, this is the point I
topic
was
of
going to make, right?
contention.
As a
It's
counter.
a topic of contention, of course. There's no debate in that. But I can't also look past the fact that his boxing looked better than ever. And one thing that I'll end on, and I'll throw it back to you, the shot selection. He's gone up to heavyweight,
Yes.
so his conditioning and his cardio is not going to be as good as it was at 205. So the output wasn't as high, but the efficiency with which he landed his shots was almost 100%. He didn't really miss many punches or kicks at all. Everything he threw landed.
Yeah, cerebral is the word. 100% I would use there.
Of course, cerebral.
Or clinical.
Meticulous.
Either of them. Meticulous. Yeah, all of those words can apply to that performance. Because it was a good one. As much as we probably aren't the biggest fans of Jon Jones inside and out the cage, I think you have to appreciate how good he is.
Where are you getting these narratives from?
I know. I don't think you're the... I don't. Maybe I'm projecting.
I'm not a fan of Jon Jones in the cage. You are projecting massively. Speak for yourself.
In the cage, I mean in the sense of, who he's fighting, and then I guess more so out the cage. Yeah, that's probably we'll go just with that. Let's just say just outside of the cage. But it's a frustrating one, because I think when you look at the time frame and how long this saga has gone on for, going back all the way to, UFC 295 was when the fight was went to initially happen, and got to look back even further to when that fight was initially announced. It's been such a long time, and we've been saying the same things over and over again, that this fight is not worth the time. We know how this is going to go. Tom Aspinall should be the man fighting Jon Jones, and we don't need to see this fight. And we waited this long only to be proven exactly right, personally. So for me, it was like, yeah, wow, very impressive performance. I will not take that away from Jones. I thought he looked good. He looked better than I thought he would, and I'm happy to be proven wrong in saying that. But it just, do you know what I mean? We haven't gone anywhere. We're exactly where we were before.
Disagree.
We've got an interim champion waiting when he shouldn't be. Forced to defend his belt. I'm sorry, but my opinions have not changed on how this fight has gone. We should have gone, would have gone, and what's going to happen
because
next.
You're looking at it too basically the same way I did to a certain extent, right? And this has transferred for me. Let me explain, hear me out, and tell me if I'm wrong.
All right. I got you.
I'm on board with everything you're saying. Before the fight, I'm on board with all of that, right? Of course it's not the fight to make. Of course it's too long in the waiting, and we don't really need to see it. Yes, it played out in regards to the win as we thought it would. The performance is a whole different conversation. I would argue that was imperative for the Tom Aspinall fight. In fact, I think that's the best thing which has ever happened to the Tom Aspinall fight. And the fact that he went out and said that he wasn't retiring is even better.
That was the silver lining. Yeah.
Let me explain. I watched an interview this week, and it was someone just looking at something from a slightly different angle, which I think is always important in MMA. Even if you don't agree with it to the maximum, I always think it's important. And someone said, what if Jon Jones is doing all of this? What if he's saying all of this to essentially build a bigger fight? Stir the pot and create more leverage. What if? I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just presenting a what if. Now, let's look at what happened. Now the MMA world, there's been a shift. Right? There's been a shift because there were a lot of people that said, Jon went and done that against Cyril. Yeah, it's impressive, but he's old, coming off an injury. Tom was smoking. Now, there's a lot of people that still believe that. But there's also a million more people that think, hold up a second, that's vintage Jon Jones. And Tom Aspinall, whilst he is fantastic and whilst he is doing great things, that's the greatest fighter of all time. And he's looking better than ever at this weight class. So now we have on our hands a Jon Jones, which has been proven at heavyweight. He was not proven before.
I agree with that.
If he fought Tom Aspinall after that Cyril Gane fight, we would be having the conversation of, we haven't seen much. What do we go off? We don't have much to go off when we're doing our breakdowns and when we're discussing it. Now, we have 3 rounds of empirical evidence of exactly what he looks like. We have Tom Aspinall, we know exactly what he looks like. And we have what Dana White calls the biggest fight in the company's history. So now we have a bigger fight than we've ever had.
I'll ask you, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, to me, definitely. I mean, this is the fight. I mean, I'm kind of speaking for you here as well. I'm going to assume you're in agreement that this is the fight we've probably wanted the longest. This is the fight to make. It always has been the fight to make. It's the fight we've been saying could, should, and would happen should Aspinall sort of do what he needed to do those years ago as he rose through that top 15, because we always said he was the guy to do it. And now we're finally seeing the pieces fall into place. And I do agree, you know, in the fight build-up, there was that sort of optimistic side of me that was thinking this almost seems a little bit too obvious from Jones with what he was saying and doing. Do you know what I mean? He was playing that role, and I was like, this is it's almost like something out of a playbook, right? You know, ducking an interview. It's like you would never do that unless you're not scared. It's Jon Jones, and as much as I don't like the guy, he would fight Aspinall given the paycheck. Maybe he is a bit scared, but just the way he acted and throughout fight week, calling Tom an arsehole, that was the one in particular which really stuck out to me. I was like, you don't really believe that, do you? You don't believe that. You're saying that because you want to rile up some hype. You want to rile up all the wrong people, get people mad, get people talking, and get more opportunities. It really comes down to the money. That's what it's about. It's create leverage, right? Yeah. Creating more negotiation opportunities should he get past Stipe, which of course he went on and did. And he's put himself in pole position for a far bigger payday than he probably would have initially expected by saying all these things and doing all these things and leaning into it as much as Tom did as well. They are both really good little bits of promo when you really want to call it. So the lines are probably blurred, I definitely say, between what's real and what's not. But all I can hope that as a resolution to it all is that we get those two squaring off in the cage with Bruce Buffer belting it out. That would probably be the most hyped I'd ever be for a fight. And I would put my money down on that fight. I would be... I never bet big on MMA, but I think that might be the first time I do because I will be riding.
I don't
to the
think
bank.
you would.
I would. I say big. I big by betting standards. I'm not talking about like a huge amount of money. I don't bet a lot.
But the lines are close, so you wouldn't win a lot either way.
But that's my point. I mean, yeah, I guess.
How was that a point?
I think just because when the usual expectation. No. No, I think what I mean is the usual expectation is whenever Jones fights, he's a massive favorite because it's Jon Jones.
Sure.
And I think, as far as I'm aware, I think the odds have slowly gotten closer and closer. But Jones has always been the favorite in that fight in terms of betting odds. But I think that might change now. So I don't know. But it's a fight I want to see. We've said it a million times, but.
Tom's a minus 130 at the moment favourite.
Really?
So essentially pick 'em odds, right?
It shouldn't be, though. In my opinion, it should. That's my point, though. I think the betting odds aren't doing it justice. I think Tom should be a bigger favourite.
I don't agree with that.
Each of their own.
All.
I believe in that man to beat anyone on this planet.
Listen.
It's the speed, man. It's the speed difference. Listen, Jon looked good in there. He looked fast compared to Stipe. He looked slick. That's compared to a 42-year-old Stipe. I went back and someone actually posted it conveniently. The fight versus Curtis Blades recently at 304. Like lightning in there. I'm sorry, it's night and day compared to Jon Jones just the other night. I'm sorry, it's true. And for me, that will be the difference. Aspinall will be first at the punch. And with a guy like him, that is quite literally all it takes. I know we said that earlier, that statement maybe being a bit overblown and overstated. Not with Tom Aspinall, it's not. It really does only take one with that man. And with the speed he has, he will get to Jones first. And that's a man who's good at rolling with those punches. But you can't roll with what you can't see. And that would be the difference maker for
me. That's how bad that one.
True, though.
I always leant towards Tom in that matchup. But the truth of it is, with that fight, and whenever I made content on it, whenever we spoke on it, my energy has always been the same. I don't know who wins. I don't know. And that's exactly why I want to see it. And that's exactly why I think it's as big a fight as we're now discussing. Because there are these question marks. There are people that sit on the side of what you're saying in regards to it's the speed. And this is the new era. And guess what? You may be 100% correct. But you also may be 100% incorrect. And the greatest of all time goes out again and does what he's done his entire life and proves it wrong. And my point is, whatever the answer and whatever the outcome, I just want the answer. That is it. I just want the answer, whatever that may be. Whether that may be Tom is as good as we say, or whether it says Jon being as good. And to be honest, as much as I love Tom, I'm British champ, all of that, I'm down to watch whatever. I'm honestly down to watch whatever on merit. So if Jon goes out there and he's better than Tom Aspinall, I wouldn't be upset. I just want the fight because I just want the opportunity for Tom to be able to prove what he believes and what I also believe of him.
I agree with the latter, but I definitely would be upset. And the amount of play, I would never hear the end of it in my stream or Discord because I have been, talking about this fight for far too long, and I think we have as well. So until we get it, I don't really want to even mention it anymore because I just don't want to tempt fate. But I think equally there's a nice fight we can go on to, which was, of course, the co-main event. Michael Chandler versus Charles Oliveira, which delivered in all of the right ways. It had everything. You almost felt like Chandler was always in that fight. I liked it. That fifth round was great. No, now I think about it, there was a little bit too much crap there for my liking. But I love that fifth round. I think Chandler did what Chandler does. And for those of you who missed it, Chandler was down and out going into that fifth round. And he put it on Oliveira, nearly finished him in a lot of ways, swung for the fences and landed hard. And credit to Charles for staying in there. But what really impressed me was when Oliveira eventually took his back in that last minute or so, the raw strength to pick him up off the mat and stand up and do what he did in that first fight by, I don't even know what to call it, jumping and trying to knock Oliveira out with a sort of slam, backward slam. That just epitomizes everything Chandler represents, and I loved it. So that was fun to watch. I was having a little laugh, a little chuckle to myself at 5:30 in the morning watching that. But Oliveira, I have to give all of the flowers because I have to say he looked so much more measured, composed, and for all of the excitement that we used to see with the Olive era, as we like to call it, when he was the champion and really at the top of his game.
Oliveira, that's good. I like that.
I didn't make it up. I've never laid claim to that phrase, but I do use it a lot.
That's not how you go about it. You just say, yes, I made that up.
Yeah, I'll take it. I'll take it. But
too late.
In that time, he was always the man to sort of throw himself into the fire. And with that comes the risks. And he got clipped a lot. But we saw last night against Chandler, in particularly outside of that fifth round, how measured he was when he took those shots. He was measured, composed, and he, honestly, I hate to use the word again, cerebral, particularly in those first two rounds. Some of the best striking and cage control I've ever seen. It was absolutely clinical. He looked like a better version. I'm exaggerating. Don't look at me like that. I'm trying to sell it, all right? Maybe it was a little bit hyperbolic, but the striking was beautiful, is my point. He looked really measured in there. And I'm not going to sit here and say he beats Makhachev come a rematch. Do I think they'll make that fight? Maybe. I think Makhachev's just too good right now. But I was really surprised with how good Oliveira looked, even with his age. That was my big question coming in. Both guys really at the back end of their career. Oliveira definitely didn't look it last night, and that excites me.
It's honestly just mind-blowing how he's had 4 careers in the UFC. He's made $1 million in bonuses. He's had 20 performance bonuses in his career, become champion, lost the belt, and it should have been the end of the chapter really there. His journey to get to that point, to capture the belt and to create that storyline was one of the best we've ever seen. Everything he overcame, everything that he went through. But then to lose it and then to get yourself back on a trajectory where you're at 155 pounds, fighting the very best in the premier organization, and then to not only do that, but to make improvements, just speaks to this man's mentality in the game. Because you watch the Islam Makhachev fight, and you see a glaring hole in it. And I've done many breakdowns on it. Just in regards to his striking defensively, especially his left hand in that fight. It was the right hook that clipped him. You go back and watch the next fight that he comes out in. I believe it was Beneil Dariush. Yeah. Looks completely different. Looks a lot more measured. Looks, as you mentioned, right? And using the same word again, looks a lot more cerebral. Things are moving a lot slower paced. He's not taking as many risks, but he's leaning towards what he's good at. And then in this fight, which really caught me off guard, we actually see him offensively wrestle. We don't see him take a lot of chances on the feet. And then we see him be, for all intensive purposes, safe to a certain extent, right? Taking the easier route. And so he should, especially when you have number one contendership on the line. So he's gone out yet again against one of the most dangerous. Yes, he's a 50-50 fighter, but one of the most dangerous, fighting Michael Chandler, like you said. He goes out again and does that. So it was just phenomenal from Charles. And what I'll say about Michael Chandler is, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but if you're coming into the organization as a new fighter or a fighter from a different show, and you know that you're good, and maybe you're good enough to be around the title, but let's be real. As much as Michael Chandler could sit here and say the belt is everything and it means everything, it's not. It's putting on exciting performances, it's having big moments, it's being a highlight reel, and it's getting paid a lot of money. That's Michael Chandler, and that's what he does. Can he get the belt doing that? Sure. Is it going to be harder? 100%. And I think that he's done a phenomenal job of creating this image, this brand, and this sort of way that people look at him, that win or lose,
you're going to watch.
People kind of want to watch him fight, and he's sort of fallen into this weird category now. So I don't think he'll ever...
to be.
Yeah, sure. I don't think he's ever going to become champion. But is he going to get paid probably 600, 700,000?
He's going to get paid more than many who have been. So
exactly.
There you go.
He's getting paid more than DJ when he was champ.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was a great fight. I do agree. I think the drawback to Oliveira maybe being a bit more safe in his approach is, of course, it doesn't make for an exciting watch per se.
For us, we don't pay his bills.
Him, he doesn't care. Yeah, exactly. He's got his win bonus. I don't think he gives a shit. But yeah, I thought it was impressive. Bo Nickel was another one that probably maybe less so against Paul Craig, who on the other hand say looked quite good in there. Lost 3 rounds to 0, but
I don't think he did.
You did? No, I think he lost all 3 rounds, but they were very close.
No, I do. Yeah, I think 30, 27.
I think 30-27 was the right scorecard. My prediction, I was very bold on a prediction that I thought Bo Nickel would knock him out in the first round. And there was that, I don't know if there was that one overhand left that Bo Nickel had, which just sort of hit just below the chin, right on the neck. And that detonated on his chin. That would have finished him. I was so annoyed by that. And credit to Paul Craig for standing in there and really hanging with a guy who, I mean, the odds speak for themselves. Was it minus 1,200 favorite? Sorry.
Ridiculous.
That's ridiculous odds in fairness.
Ridiculous.
But again, people forget, and Bo made a point of this in his post-fight interview. That's his 7th professional fight. Cut the boy some slack. I mean, come on. I mean, the New York crowd, did not hold back in the slightest, and I do feel a little bit sorry for him because he looked measured in there. He looked composed. He did what he needed to do. Maybe he could have fought with a little bit more urgency because those rounds were close, and perhaps on another day the judges don't go in his favor, and he's got a loss on his record. So maybe a little bit more for him in terms of urgency, activity. But I thought he looked pretty good in there, all things considered.
I definitely think Paul Craig looked very improved, right? He looked in phenomenal shape
as well.
He looked a lot more comfortable on the feet. You could see him between rounds. He was saying he's actually having fun. He started to loosen up. But make no mistake, that fight looked a lot closer because of the odds and because of the name of Bo Nickel. The fight wasn't really close. Paul Craig didn't really land a shot the entire time. And I think the issue that you have with that fight is expectation management. Now, if you actually listen to Bo Nickel, to what he actually says about his career, that was perfectly on brand. But it's as a fan base, we create the narrative of this exciting prospect should just go out and dust anyone. When in reality, he's going against a 25 professional fight veteran,
26
all across the world, 26, who's fought all across the world, who has submitted a previous champion, and who has also submitted a man who's fighting for the belt next, who's undefeated. So you've got a seriously dangerous person in front of you. And he went a full 15 minutes in his 7th professional fight on the biggest stage, brightest lights, Donald Trump front row. And there were close rounds, but it wasn't close. There were close rounds, but it wasn't close, if you hear what I'm saying. So I don't think it was an exciting performance. I don't think it was even too far out of his comfort zone. And
but
I
this
think
is something
right.
I'll just add on to that. Sorry to just jump in. But it's one of those performances that every great, I'm not going to say it here and say Bo Nickel is going to be one of those.
That's what he said.
Every great has one of these.
That's what he said.
Every great has a bit of a dud performance where maybe they coasted a little bit. Maybe they just got caught up in the flow of the fight, didn't really press the occasion, and then they won a boring decision. It happens. It happens to so many of these guys in their rise, and then they become champion, and that bout becomes an absolute footnote.
7 professional fights. I don't care whether you come from the highest level of another sport, which is in the combat world. 7 professional fights is absolutely nothing. That's no fighting experience whatsoever, especially at the level of which he's been competing. He's gone from Cody Brundage to Paul Craig, who's been in the rankings for God knows how long, and is always a very, very dangerous
and fought up a weight
opponent.
class.
Exactly, right? So you've got so many factors at play, and you hit the nail on the head. You always see that from prospects to a certain extent, right? You can give me examples where that isn't the case, sure. But also, I would probably argue they haven't had 6 professional fights before that. So whilst it wasn't the most exciting, I was impressed. And the last thing I'll say on that is he understands the game so well, and his mindset is perfect for this scenario. He wasn't fazed by the booing. Of course, he wouldn't have liked it. He would have rather they'd be cheering, of course. He didn't love it. But my point is he wasn't deterred. He's been 4 or 5 years of age with 100, 200 people watching his wrestling match, trying to watch him lose. And then when he got beaten by a kid at 5, 6 years old, he goes to a competition next week and the kid's wearing a top saying, "I beat Bo Nickel" at 5 years of age. This kid has been born under the pressure and the light.
Exactly.
He's
it's crazy when you think about it like that, isn't it? He's just born into that.
He's not used to people not thinking something was impressive, or he understands the game.
Wrestling culture's wild, man.
He understands the game. So, yeah, I don't think it was exciting, but I do think it was impressive in a different way, for sure.
Speaking of not exciting, I feel like we have to touch on it, even if for a brief moment, because on Friday night, we had Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson, which might be the biggest bank robbery of the last decade in combat sports. Yeah, of course it was. Let's be honest here. That's what it was. It was a sparring match. Come off it. Production value was cool. I think the only silver lining to that whole event was that we got Katie Taylor, Amanda Serrano too, which I was more excited for going in because their first fight is one of my favorite boxing matches in history. And that second one somehow outdid it. I don't know if you watched that fight as well live, but
sure,
it was unbelievable. Unbelievable. And there was a lot of debate about the decision. I thought the commentary were very biased and had it all wrong. I don't think it was as big of a robbery as people were saying it was. I think it was a very close fight. And it was incredible. And they deserve all the plaudits. And thankfully, with that main event sort of looming afterwards, it was over 50, 60 million people that watched those women fight, which is historic. So all the praises to them. One of my favorite fights ever. Absolute war. That 7th round, I don't know what levels you need to dig to in your mind to sort of keep fighting there, but I was in disbelief. I absolutely loved it. It's a shame that the main event was such a dampener on it because what it was, in my eyes, was Jake Paul going at 20%, if that. Come off it, he was. He could have put Mike away at any point in that fight. And I don't want to be the guy to say that. I wish we saw Mike Tyson somehow miraculously roll back 20%. The years and knock out.
You stand by that.
I'll 30 at a push, but yeah. 20, 30. The point stands. It's the premise, right? He even said it in the post-fight interview, and he's not just trying to save face for a poor performance. It was clearly obvious that he was holding back. There was a couple of shots early where Jake Paul sort of stumbled Mike a little bit. He didn't have the balance. He didn't have the legs. Jake could have finished that fight at any minute that he wanted to after that when he realized, okay, I can put this guy away. And he didn't because he doesn't want to knock out an old Mike Tyson. It's not really a good look. You know, you can say, oh, Mike went the distance and they can play with that narrative, but let's just call it what it was. All right. It was a bit of a sparring session. It was Jake holding back and it was Mike looking like a 58-year-old man as much as all the old heads and people like that who watched Mike grow up didn't expect it to be or didn't want it to be. That's exactly what it was, and exactly what we got.
It wasn't a pay-per-view.
Does that justify it?
Of course it does. Are you being serious? If you're sitting there and you paid $70, $80 to watch that, of course, you can turn around and be absolutely aggrieved. Now, can you turn around after that and say, oh, that was a bit of a bit of a wet fish. Didn't really enjoy that. Nothing really came of it. Yeah, sure. Wasn't the most exciting fight. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it was. But I will sit here and tell you that no one paid to watch that fight, essentially. It's on Netflix. Everyone's got Netflix. Everyone knows an account. Don't tell me it's £5 a month streaming service. I don't need to hear it. But my point is, no one...
I think it's more than that these days.
Yeah, true. My point is, no one paid for it, right? So that's essentially... it's as good as it being on YouTube these days with Netflix in the modern world.
Fair enough.
So my point is the exposure for the card, for that fight between Serrano and Katie Taylor, which was phenomenal. And then, above all else, just boxing. I think sometimes people get a little bit emotional about these fights, but they kind of forget the fantastic work promotionally that Jake Paul and Mike Tyson to a certain degree
full credit to Jake Paul, actually, in particular.
He's just turning the game on its head. And you can sit there and say, I think he gets beaten by X and he beats Y and he shouldn't beat X and he shouldn't fight Y. It's all theatrics. It's all pantomime. Yeah. It's all WWE. Yes, there's a fight at the end of it, always. And you can discuss amongst yourself how legitimate you think.
Might be a little bit of a...
Yeah, you can discuss amongst yourselves to what extent they are fights, right? Are there stipulations in place? Is he holding back? What I would say is I came into that fight thinking... In fact, I watched it with my cousin. My cousin doesn't really watch anything like that and was under the illusion, like many people, by the way. No, Mike Tyson.
My father included, yeah.
I actually knew. I was going to say, I think your old man was one of them, right?
I was trying to convince him. I was like, you just don't understand, man. You weren't there. I was like, I don't care if I weren't there. Look at him.
So he became champion 40 years ago. Like, that's what we need to talk about.
Oh,
right?
My God.
That's insane. But what I'll say, and which is very true, if we're having this conversation before the fight and breaking it down, say a year ago even, and definitely 2 years ago, God knows about 3, my conversation would have been so different. But now where I've spent quite a lot of years, or not a lot, but multiple years in MMA gyms, right? You can see very viscerally what older age looks like in combat sports. So you can watch someone hit pads. You can watch someone touch spar. You can watch someone train, and they have skills that they've always had to a certain extent. Now, yes, they would lose sharpness. Yes, they would lose some of the coordination and whatnot, but they'll have skills. But I've also watched those same people who have been in MMA their whole life now get to sort of late 30s, early 40s, even touching 50s in some examples, sparring. The body cannot physically take the level of impact, even just on a much smaller scale, than it ever could. And if you are talking a sport which takes damage, it's boxing. And if you're talking a division, it's heavyweight. All I was saying with that is once you see it firsthand, you see, yes, they may have skills, but their body is fragile after a lifetime of beating. And one thing I'll say about the Jake Paul performance, before it, I said he's going to knock him out. Then I realised it was 14-ounce gloves, 2-minute rounds, 8 rounds. I thought, okay, it's a little bit more favourable for Mike in regards to surviving. So maybe not a knockout, probably unanimous decision. But I still believed before the fight that Jake would have went in there to knock him out. I still, after the fight, was thinking, I think he would have knocked him out if he could. Then I heard him speak, and he mentioned about hurting him a little bit, and he sort of laid off a little bit and maybe carried him a touch, which I think there's an element of truth in. I'm not saying that's 100% wrong. I'm not saying that's flat out incorrect, but I'm also not sure that it's 100% correct. Because the reason I say that is because you look at the first round, the second round, Jake wings a big right hand, a big right hand that just clips Tyson and stumbles him a little bit, just clips and doesn't connect. If his range is a fraction of an inch different, he's flatlined on the canvas and we're having a different conversation and everyone's bitterly disappointed on the Sunday. So I'm telling you, he doesn't have the ability, and not many do, by the way, to go in live speed in a fight and to know your range where you're just out, can wing full speed and just clip. That's not how it works. So that's the reason why I'm somewhat skeptical of the narrative of, he could have finished him at any time, because I saw him throw and nearly connect with shots which would have ended it. Not to mention that he did actually jab him and put him on skates. So he definitely carried him to a certain extent. But I also think maybe, I saw Luke Thomas make the point, and also I agree with him to a certain extent, and I'm not too sure how much. But I also think there may have been somewhat of a skill deficiency to not actually possibly carry that over the line. Now, I'm not sure whether that's the case or not, but I don't think he's as clear cut as, I took it easy because he's old. I don't know if it's as clear cut as that.
Yeah. I mean, for all of how boring, because I'll use the word, that fight was, it was a bit of an eyesore. We were all watching. Over 16 million people were watching. And you mentioned earlier about the promotional game of Jake Paul and how he's changing the boxing game. I think that isn't epitomized more. Why is my camera gone again? We'll bring it back in a second. That can't be epitomized more than with the press conference, right? Mike wasn't really giving a lot. He wasn't really saying much of anything at all. And Jake Paul stepped in, took the initiative, and got the predictions from all of the fighters else on stage, and then said, put your money where your mouth is, and walked up to each and every one of them and said, how much you want to bet? How much you want to bet? And turned that presser on its head from boring to exciting. Yeah, and showed a side to these fighters and put them on the spot where they can't just regurgitate things or say the usual status quo words they say about their upcoming fight. They had to think outside the box and say things they probably didn't want to say. And it made for, yeah. And it made for something really exciting. So I love that from Jake Paul. As much as I don't like him and he has his detractors, and I think he's probably not the greatest human being on earth, you ain't got to be a boxer. So it doesn't matter. And you're going to tune in either way. And Jake Paul did a good job of getting people on board, and I will give him full credit for that.
Yeah, absolutely generational promoter. Self-promoter, one of the greatest promoters of this generation, hands down. It's not even close. And you can dislike him, you can not respect him, you can look at everything he does and think it's all shambolic. It doesn't matter. The brand and the currency in today's market is not gold, it's attention, right? And he has more gold and attention, I should say, than absolutely anyone. And he even understands how to leverage that beyond himself and involve people like Mike Tyson, who brings an entire different section of the globe as well. So, yeah, to just round off on that point, it really is incredible when you look at not only what he does with his businesses and what he's doing with his boxing career, even if he's not the best in the world. People get a little bit caught up in that. He's gone from essentially never even hitting a mitt since he was whatever age to now fighting on the biggest, most global stages. It just has to be a level of respect for that, or at least flipping intrigue to how he'd done it and gone on such a brand. So
yeah,
I thought it was super.
I was pinching myself, honestly. Like I was when they were walking out, I was like, "It's really happening, isn't it?"
Yeah,
I was like, "This is actually something that's going down." If you told me that 10 years ago, I would have, laughed in your face. But here we are. That's the absurdity, and that's why it's done so well. But yeah, I mean, combat sports wise, I think let's look outside of that, because obviously in our own personal and I guess work lives as well, we've been doing a lot of things, a lot of moving parts for you in particular, because of course we mentioned the other week you were going out to Thailand to work at Karate Combat, and of course you got the UFC Macau filming for Lonnie Kavanagh coming up. How has your week been in the pit?
Honestly, it's been disjointed, it feels like, because I've always been someone who's not necessarily had quite a structured routine, where I'm very much that person now. So being on the road's been a little bit weird because it's just thrown that off. And it's not so much the jet lag that people usually encounter. For me, it was more just the times of getting my head around the time differences and the schedulings and making it to different places. But I went to Karate Combat on Thursday, and the event was absolutely sick. The venue was cool. It was a small, sort of intimate arena, and they just understand it. They really understand what they're trying to do and where they can create exponential growth. Because what I think people do, not just in their line of work, but mostly everything, right? Is they look at the status quo, as you said earlier, and they look at what everyone's doing, and then they try and do it similar and do it better. But often, when people have been doing these things for years, they're likely either going to be better than you, or they're missing places to create great growth. And I think one thing that Karate Combat do very, very well, they put no emphasis on, or I should change that. They don't get fixated about creating an arena show where they can have as many people and 10,000, 20,000 people, cram as many people as possible. They know that that's not how this game works, right?
Yeah.
They have a small, intimate arena. They made the tickets free for spectators to come and visit. They had free-flowing drinks, and they had a phenomenal show. And they know that there's going to be a good atmosphere and a good buzz. But in front of that, in front of the cameras, they're going to have a 10 million viewership on a YouTube live stream because it's not behind a paywall, and they have a great product. So in regards to the business side, it's always fascinating just to watch how they sort of navigate the scene. And then in regards to a personal side, I would probably say that is the first event that I can pretty much hands up say I maximized as much as I possibly could. And I'll explain what I mean by that, because I've gone to events for the last 2-3 years that I've worked at, and I've always come away thinking, okay, I could have done this differently. I should have shot more of this type of content. I should have spoke to this person. I should have done that. And I didn't maximize that event as much as I could. This time was very different. I flew to Bangkok for this purpose. I was prepared in regards to my kit, the batteries, having everything prepared, a shot list. I had everything ready to go and firing. So when I got there, it was just straight business. So yes, I couldn't sit down and sort of enjoy the show for all it was to a certain extent, but I definitely maximized my opportunity being there. And then at the end of it all, I managed to get an interview with our friend of the show, President Awesome, and he just gave me 10 minutes at the end of the show, which I was so grateful for. And we had just a really, really good conversation. And he just started cutting promo after promo.
He's good, man. He's good.
After promo after
as
promo. As
charismatic in real life as he was over the screen, I'm sure.
Even more so, right?
Even
so
more
I can feed off his energy, and we can sort of go back and forth. And
makes it easy for you, doesn't he?
I know I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here.
No, I love
back. But yeah, he gave me fantastic energy. And then on top of that, just from a more sort of selfish brand perspective, I then have those clips, I then post those clips, and then they're collaborated not only with himself, the president, but then also Karate Combat itself, right? So the premier organization pretty much in combat sports outside of UFC right now. I'm on the front grid doing these interviews in my Casuals Corner jersey in Bangkok with the president. And I just thought, right, okay, now we're actually starting to make traction. And one thing I have to say is we have to shout out the matchmaker. And I feel terrible because my pronunciation of his name is awful and I kept getting it wrong. So I need to get it right next time. I'm going to say it's Faizan, and I hope I'm right for that. And I'll tell you a funny story. I rock up and I say hello to a couple of people. There's a couple of people there that I know. I went with an influencer who's quite big in the travel space, Bearded Travels. And a couple of people came up to him. Of course, he's very distinguishable and he's quite a big creator in the market, right? So a few people come up to him and said, oh, I love your work and whatnot. And then obviously, with it just being an MMA show, there's always a couple of people that sort of know of me or know my stuff, right? It's a small group of people. It's a small.
Yeah. You're in that space, right?
Exactly, right. It's only so big. It's not like football, for example, where it's a lot grander. So a couple of people will sort of come up to me and go, "Oh, Cash Corner, nice to see you." Someone comes up to me,
Cash's Corner, in it. Like,
yeah, of course.
You don't have a name.
Yeah, I love it. No, I don't have a name.
No,
that is my name. Like, that's exactly what
that
I
is
want.
you. It's your everything. Yeah,
I think it's brilliant. Some people do actually know my name, which always makes me think, oh, you must read the end of my captions because that's the only place that I put it. The end of my description. Sorry. Someone comes up to me and says, oh, Will, and sort of introduced himself. And we get speaking, and it's the matchmaker for Karate Combat, youngest matchmaker ever, who I'd actually spoke to on Instagram just before I'd gone to the event. And it turns out that he said to me something that was super specific and super niche. And then he said, oh, yeah, I knew you were coming to Karate Combat. That's why I reached out to you. And said, oh, how did you know? I didn't really put that anywhere. He said, I'm one of the 10 people that watch your podcast. And I was absolutely creasing because I thought that is so true. And I'm so happy that I've met one of the 10 people because it just fills me with so much joy that this is one of the people.
But that's what it's about, right? That's what it is. I did not expect. That is literally what it's about because I was talking to someone on Instagram. Someone reached out to me. Forgive me for not remembering their name, but they were asking me about advice for how to package their YouTube videos and stuff and breaking into the niche. And they were talking about doing the commentary side of MMA, sort of the MMA niche, right? So talking to the camera. And I didn't mention it per se in that conversation, but the immediate thought that came to me was that's such a harder nut to crack, right? It's such a harder niche to break into because it's far more saturated. And the point I'm making is the same couldn't exactly be said for podcasts. It's so harder to break into that market. And the only real way to do it is through consistency and just long-term growth. That really is the only way with podcasts, because as you cultivate your other audience, you siphon them into your podcast. And that is the way to do it. So when you get stuff like that, you're building a core audience, right? You're building that intimate group of people. So hearing that is great. But this is what I spoke a while ago about. I don't know if I mentioned you, I got more excited about getting 400 views on my game channel video than I did getting 100,000 on my MMA run, because it feels more intimate, it feels more personable, and it feels more earned, right? I don't know if that makes any sense. And I guess that's the same sentiment when you hear something like that, because it's in person. It's someone saying that. That's great. That makes me
absolutely happy. Firstly, I was just laughing my head off. I thought it was hilarious. He was actually really funny. He was actually really funny, quite quick and quite quick-witted. We had a really good conversation, actually. And I was talking to him about his sort of job at Karate Combat, because interestingly enough, he is the matchmaker, but he is also in uni at the moment. So he's sort of balancing all these things. And I said we should definitely get him on the pod to have a chat with him, because he does have a very fascinating job role. And he also watches both of our content, which I find interesting. So he said that, he said that he watches all of your stuff and all of my stuff as well. So then when he saw that we had a podcast, it just so happened to sort of marry. But when he said he's one of the 10, I thought that's so funny, because we always know, right? If you look at YouTube, for example, if you get consistently, let's say on average, you'll probably get 100 views a video or something like that. You know that probably a fraction of that percent, 10% at best, are going to be actual listeners of that. Maybe someone's clicked in and listened to a few minutes, but there's going to be actually very few listeners. So to meet one of the very few listeners was actually so sick. That's great. But the event in total at Karate Combat was great. It was, the pit is just,
it's awesome. I want to go.
So much better. If
they ever do an event in the UK, I'm all over that. I will be there.
London's going to be just a matter of time. Right? They're going to all the sort of main locations. But Karate Combat was so good. I really loved the venue. I really loved the vibe, the passion that all of that team work with is insane. Everything.
I think with a guy like Asim, it kind of trickles down, right? Yeah. Sure. There you go.
It does, but you can tell that it isn't the case where I've seen setups like that where you can very easily tell the person at the top is just very passionate, and the other people know that they need to sort of match that energy because that's the guy at the top. But that isn't the case. Everyone is standalone, as passionate and driven to execute on this mission as the next person, as Asim. Whether it's the matchmaker, whether it's the production, whether it's the guy at the top of the tree. And you can definitely feel that. So there really is something bubbling away with them. They're absolutely smashing it. And to be honest, I was so happy to be involved. And I want to be involved in as many as I can, because the product itself I absolutely love.
It is good, isn't it?
Yeah, I love it.
That's it's so difficult to crack a unique angle, right? In the same way we spoke about with podcasts and sub niches of MMA in particular, it's so difficult to break out. And the same can be said for fight promotions. And Karate Combat is one of the few that does it so well. They have managed to differentiate themselves by being so left field and being so wild. It has worked. So I hope we see a more progression. If we just further, I hope we see good things, only good things from Karate Combat, because I love watching it.
The one last thing I'll say on that is, I guess it's just to redirect it a little bit more to a sort of creator side of things, just because I do think it's important.
And again,
I think it's always the case in MMA. Most certainly is the case, to be honest. The UFC is the premier organization, right? The UFC is the premier of everything. But the UFC is also, to a certain degree, completely saturated with different angles, whether it be commentary, whether it be production, photographers, media members, going to the shows and being the member, and all of these different angles. So when people get into the space of MMA or content creation, their site is always, okay, I want to go and cover the UFC. But the longer I've spent in this sort of sport, the more I realize there's actually so much more utility and actual enjoyment not really chasing that at all, to be honest. And I've actually found, for me personally, it's going to be different for person to person.
No, I get you.
For me, person to person, I actually have no care in the world to ever be in a media scrum in the UFC ever. I really have no care to do that. I would happily go to the fight week and document things of that nature, sure. But in regards to going into the media scrum and asking a dehydrated fighter after 4 weeks of media, how was their camp? Don't care for it.
God,
and sometimes I think,
man.
And sometimes I think,
that stuff makes
no, you're all good. And sometimes I think, the last thing I'll say on it, sometimes I think sometimes people should just broaden their horizons a little bit in their mind,
absolutely,
of what they could go into, whether it be a regional show, whether it be maybe an up and coming show in a different country if they can, if the logistics allow. I think just think outside the box a little bit to get in front of people, because that's what everyone's trying to do, right? They're trying to get into the UFC and to the top of the UFC in the media space. But it's like going to jiu-jitsu. I was having this conversation with my cousin, right? Craig Jones. Craig Jones is a phenomenal example. Craig Jones was good at jiu-jitsu, but he started late and he wasn't the best. So he needed to find a way to sort of hack him almost to the top. Now, you can't just do that solely. You have to find ways to round out your game. But he found leg locks. So getting very good at leg locks, he could sort of hack the system a little bit to get a lot of wins and to get a lot of notoriety and blow through a lot of people who he otherwise wouldn't maybe have beaten. Same with this game, right? You have to sort of hack the system a little bit. How can I get in front of all these people, but maybe I don't go through the traditional route of, okay, I'm going to try and be a UFC media member, because it's very flipping difficult and a long process. Keep thinking outside the box and just keep improving. But what I will say, just to finally wrap up on this point, I know I've gone on a lot, is that's also 3 years of sort of culminated work to sort of get to that spot and be in front of that camera as well. So it's not as if I started yesterday and I woke up.
Don't ever take that for granted either. Like, people
that's
do,
to give perspective to people listening. That's more so just rather than for me to feel, there's nothing about that. It's more so if people are listening and, okay, I want to do that. You also have to
got to put the work in.
Yeah, you also have to understand you have to round yourself out to a certain level before you can start having certain conversations. Regional shows, shows that are around the corner from your house, you have to do those. And in fact, it's better you do those, because the last thing that you want is for the most amount of people to see you when you're worst. You want the least amount of people to see you at your worst, and then develop that over time.
Mic drop. I would give you a counter argument, but I for those of you who are watching the podcast, you can probably see that my camera keeps turning off, and I have no idea why that is. So I think that's probably a good indicator to wrap it up. I know we're back now for however long, I do not know, because I had to turn it off and on about 4 times there when you were speaking. So my apologies, but that was a good little chat. This has been the MMA Careers Podcast, episode number 78, I do believe. And we will see you next Sunday. Have a good one.